Archaeological, buenas tardes. Yo soy Sabiotero de Yauzarrea, el Fondo para el Estudio y Difusión de la Cultura Vasca. Acabamos de hacer un congreso en Irún, Atlantiar, en el que ha participado Ekkian Augustine, y teníamos oportunidad, como se quedaba algún día, pues en poderle traer también para contar y explicarnos un poco más cómo es en la actualidad la situación de las primeras naciones. Steven es un gran amigo, Mi'kmaq en su lengua es Elnu. Los Elnu habitan la orilla derecha del río San Lorenzo y enfrente, en la otra orilla, están los Inu y mucho más al norte, en el Ártico, los Inuit. Todas estas palabras en sus idiomas significan lo mismo, es humano. Como es lo que buscamos, esa esencia del ser humano desde Yauzarrea, nuestro propósito es, en el programa que tenemos hecho o empezado con ellos, Oreña Urkian Kanata, buscar esas raíces comunes, esas relaciones comunes que ha habido, al menos lo que está documentado académicamente desde 1517, y sobre todo llegar a profundizar en muchas esencias del ser humano, de nuestra especie, y podernos reencontrar. Siempre nos encontramos, no han perdido ellos el recuerdo de los vascos, ni nosotros el suyo, pero al vernos como en un espejo reflejados, bueno, podemos aprender quizá cosas y podemos empezar a reflexionar mejor. Yo creo que todo lo que hagamos es bueno en ese sentido, en el hecho de podernos conocer mejor y podernos entender todas las orillas del Atlántico Norte y sobre todo poder conocer más de nosotros mismos para mejorar en el futuro y que sirva para todos los que nos rodean. Bueno, pues agradecer la presencia de Steven aquí, y él va a explicarnos lo que es, lo que hace y lo que hacen sus primeras naciones del Atlántico Norte en Canadá.
Gracias, Walalin. Welda idandel wigumio nige lagisku ga uskadig. Welda idan. I'm sorry, translators. Welda idandel wigumio nige ladetta erlewistu chida danam kusewa dandelo tigu weltes kadul tigu. Ab nige gisku ga iliol des kadul tigu. Welda ides nige uskadig. Weskawidaika uskadigawisultiv nigelagisku. I just wanted to acknowledge, I wanted to thank Xabi Otero for inviting me to Uskadi and to be able to meet the people of Uskadi and to be able to share food, music and dance and have a beautiful welcome here for my stay in the 10 days that I'm here. I just wanted to also acknowledge that the Mi'kmaq people welcomed the Uskadi whalers long time ago, and they came as visitors to our territory. They didn't come to take our land, and this is where the real friendship took place initially. So we are meeting up again, and we want to build that friendship with the people of Uskadi here in Spain and in France. Today I want to talk about my people, and the first academic perspective of Indian people was through archaeological reports. There was one found in Nova Scotia, a place called Debert. It is dated around 11,500 years before present. That is to say that people inhabited the traditional area where I live today. They don't call them Mi'kmaq people, they call them Paleo-Indians, which was something of another title given to indigenous peoples. rather than saying those were the Mi'kmaq people 11,500 years ago. It is a belief that our cultures have developed over a long period of time. It is in the same context that the Paleo people here in this area were Uskari people. And there's links to your culture and the culture of the people that were living in the caves, in the same way that we think we have links, but there have been no DNA sampling done because they have not found bones, human remains that are reflective of that far back, 11,500 years before present. But in 3,500 years ago, there was a place that was found by my great uncle, Ekkian Augustine, and they called the archaeological site Augustine Mound, 3,500 years ago. But we think that the culture had developed to what the Europeans discovered in North America as Mi'kmaq people, my culture, were alive and were occupying this area 3,500 years ago. And in Grand Lake, New Brunswick, Cow Point, there was a site that was found 2,300 years before present. And we also believe that a lot of the stone culture and artifacts that were found there were similar to the ones that were used by the Mi'kmaq people 1,000 years later. And by 1500, archaeologists, not 1500, but not too long ago, archaeologists found sites that were dated around 1,500 years before present. And they were called the copper kettle burials. They were like copper pots that were traded with the Basque whalers, because they brought these copper kettles themselves to use to cook their own food and things outside on a fire, an open fire, or inside in a fireplace. And they would hang these on metal hangers and swing them in over the fire. But the Mi'kmaq people became more mobile because of these copper kettles, because they could carry their food and cook their food anywhere. Where a long time ago, it would require a big log to be hollowed out by our people, and we would put hot stones into the log in order to make the water to boil and to cook our food. But with a copper kettle burial, you did not have to carry those big logs around. And the Indians, Mi'kmaq people, could travel further distances, and they arrived to Red Bay and Tadoussac to meet the Basque whalers and fishermen. And so there was a lot of friendly trade going on because nobody was trying to take over anybody's land. Well, this brings back to our oral history information in my context, the knowledge that my people, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and they had learned from their ancestors about our history through oral history, oral traditions. Those were stored in our songs, in our stories, even in our dances, explains how we were related to a certain geographic area of land and to certain animals. And last year when I was here, I was so grateful to see the Basque dancers, men. They were dancing the dance of the pattern of the bee. And for me, that was a signal. The Basque people have developed music and songs and have followed the patterns of a bee dancing to a queen bee, and to be able to externalize a culture from that experience in the same way that we have dances in relation to deer or moose or a rabbit or a fish or a bird. We have all these dances that we pretend to be like a bird, and the patterns that a bird follows in a circle or hopping, or like we have a dance called the crow hop, and the Indians, they follow the crow, and then they start hopping around as the crow hops around and following the same patterns. So what we have is a Mi'kmaq creation story. Our elders explained to us when we gathered together for many, many generations, our people They live along the rivers, along the coastlines, along the lakes, on the shorelines, along the ocean, in the land. But generally, in the winter when the snow falls, like it did in the Pyrenees Mountains last week, there was lots of snow I saw on the mountains. But back home, we get lots of snow, and it's very high, 2 to 3 meters in the wintertime. And our people, they travel up the river with our canoes, and we find we separate ourselves into smaller groups, smaller families, so we have a better opportunity to feed ourselves with the limited resources. So we don't have to look for big animals. We kill the moose in the wintertime. We don't kill it in the summertime because the meat is not good in the summertime. For the fish, we have to eat it in the springtime and the fall time of the year. In the middle of the summer, the fish is no good to eat. The meat will just fall apart. It's no good. So we follow these natural patterns. We go up the river in the wintertime. In the springtime of the year, when the firefly is lighting up and the frogs, they come out, little, you hear the frog in the springtime. When you hear the frog and see the firefly, we have approximately 10 to 15 days of weather that we can peel the bark off a birch bark tree. And I know that the birch bark is an important tree here. Kaikus are made out of birch bark, and many other tools are used to make not the birch bark, but the birch tree. And so we make canoes, we make our shelters, wigwam, we cover it with birch bark. We make boxes and containers to put our food. We make it out of birch bark. We fold it in a certain way and we sew it and make sure that the connections or where it joins together, we put sap from the trees to protect it from leaking out or leaking in, like in a canoe. Where we sew the canoe on the outside, we cover it with spruce sap. I don't know what the sap would mean and how they would say it on Espanol. Anyway, we make lots of things from birch bark. And so in the springtime of the year, those natural indications for us, environmental signals, it's a good time to peel the bark, prepare our canoes, and bring enough bark to cover our wigwams when we gather together in a bigger community at the mouth of the river on the coastline. And when we come to the mouth of the river, the elder will start singing a song. Awech guida jikan gigama huladet nigea maui omi weskawasik weldas walto tim tang hui. Awech guida jik niskamich huladet nigea nenami dichtan eldajik akatami ti chudauti wo. Awech guida jikan giguina huladet nigea bepgujede madi neutit ba wehaya yo. Weha, weha, wehaya, weha, wehaya, wehaya, yo, way. So this is a gathering song to indicate to everybody it's time to gather. We are back together as a family, and the elders are with us because they know the way to come. The young people are here. They're our backbone of our nation. They're going to help us bring our village together. Our mothers are here. They're going to teach us how to help one another to be like brothers and sisters, hermanos and hermanas. and our leaders are here to follow and give us a way of life that we will need to follow in order to survive and to continue to live off the land. And so the song gathers the people together. And the creation story is told. Gizulk, he made everything. Niskam, grandfather, son, he gives us our shadows. And our shadows are connected to our bodies. And our shadows represent the spirits of our ancestors that have gone and passed away. They died. They've been buried into their soil. But their shadows follow us everywhere we go. So we know that we are being protected and guided by our spirits, our ancestors. We carry their blood, their characteristics, and so everything that we are is part of our shadow. All of our family, we carry our family with us everywhere we go because the sun show us that they are with us and they are following us. They are guiding us. And Usitkamu, we say Usitkamu. Usitkamu is an area that is flat, an area of land, Usitkamu. And Weskit is the top of, and Ga'ami is when we stand upon the earth. So Usitkamu and Uskijinu, Uskari. Uskijinu is the person that is able to move freely on the surface of the earth. Uskijinu, Inu, Ulnu, Inuit, Ulnape are all terms that mean people of the land, people that belong to the land, and we don't own the land, we belong to it. And this is the difference in the concepts of the relationship between us and the land. Uskijinu. On top of the earth, a bolt of lightning hit, and from the elements of the earth, a person was shaped. The second bolt of lightning hit, he was given his fingers and his toes, and 7 sacred parts to the head, 2 ears to listen from the goodness of our heart, 2 eyes to look at people with the goodness from our heart, 2 holes in the nose to take the sacred breath when we come into the world. We also sense our smell. We smell the animals, we smell the birds, we smell the people, we smell the fish, we smell the people, we know our distance. If they are related to us, they smell like us. If they are not related to us, they don't smell like us. We stay far away from them. This is our natural physiological safety mechanism that we have, our sense of smell. Children are the same way. If they see a stranger, they don't come running to the stranger. They run this way and go to their father or their mother. This is a natural protection for children. And the mouth, the 7th part of the mouth is we take the water from Mother Earth, we take the medicine from Mother Earth, we take the food from Mother Earth, and what comes out is words. We share the words. And our elders teach us as a principal moral value that we listen first, we look first, we sense our place, our distance with others, and then we share the words. We share the water, we share the food that comes from Mother. It belongs to everybody because we belong there as well, that we are obliged to feed everybody that comes to us as part of our family and so on. So this person that was created had these 7 sacred parts to his head that were governed by his heart. Then the 3rd bolt of lightning hit, he stood up and he looked around. He discovered his world. He looked up and he said, "Thank you, Gizulk, walaling Gizulk uchitan deliganamuin nimajwa anam." Thank you, grandfather, son, for giving me my shadow, my ancestors to carry around to protect me. Thank you, Mother Earth, for allowing part of yourself for my creation. I belong to you. You are my mother. And so he discovers his world. He travels west. He is born in eastern part of North America, northeastern part. Then he travels west, and then he travels south. He travels north, and then he travels back to where he was created. He sees the sparks left over from his three bolts of lightning hitting the earth cause the sparks to fly, and the sparks land in a circle. and he is standing in the middle of the circle, and he is looking up at grandfather's son. And before he could ask the question, who am I, what am I doing here, he sees a bird flying, and the bird finally lands in front of him. It's the bald eagle. And the eagle tells him, I am the biggest bird that flies the highest in the sky. I see the furthest of all the birds. I have been given the responsibility to be a messenger to the giver of life, Grandfather, Son, and Mother Earth. I am here to tell you, you are going to be joined by your family to help you understand your place in this world. And Glooskap is very happy, and the eagle flies back into the sky, and a feather falls from the eagle, and it lands before it hits the earth. He picks it up, and he hangs on to the feather. It is my connection to my creation. It is my connection to the eagle, who is a sacred bird and a messenger to us. That's why we wear eagle feathers on our hats. We carry them, and eagle feathers are given to people because they give themselves to their own people. They don't think of themselves and say, how much money can I make from this? They just turn around and do responsibilities to their own people, and so they receive eagle feathers. I have been given many eagle feathers. I have at home, and it's because I am a natural leader to my own peoples, and my own people recognize this. Every time I come and make a presentation or ceremonies, I get many eagle feathers, but I give them away too to people who I think deserved eagle feathers. So this is our culture hero, Glooskap, who's given his creation, and now he is told he's going to be joined by somebody, and when he turns around, he sees an old woman sitting on a rock. She's all bent over. She's shiny, glistening from the reflection of the sun. Her hair is white and silver in color, and she's bent over like this, and she had no clothes on, and Glooskap goes over and he says, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" She said, "I am your grandmother. I have been given an existence from this stone. I come from the stone of our Mother Earth. I come as an old woman, already wise and knowledgeable. I can teach you about the stars, the moon, the sun, the earth, the animals, the plants, the fish. I can teach you everything, how to obtain your medicine and your food and your shelter, your clothing and your tools of survival, and how you're going to travel about on the snow, on the ice, on the water." Glooskap is happy. His grandmother is here. He asks a little animal, a bistanuj. It's a marten. "My brother," he says, can you come here?" And the brother comes over, a little animal, and he gives him a gift of tobacco. He says, "Here, I want to ask a favor of you." The little animal takes the tobacco. When somebody gives you tobacco, you have to say yes. And he says, "Grandmother and I have to ask you, can you give us your life? Because we need to continue to exist." The animal says, "Yes, take my life." He picks up the animal, takes it to Glooskap, his grandmother. Grandmother snaps his neck and lays the animal down. In the meantime, Glooskap, with his eagle feather, he asks, "Oh, giver of life, I am sorry I've taken the life of an animal, my brother. Grandfather, I am sorry I took the shadow of my brother. And Mother Earth, I am sorry I took an element of yourself for my survival. But if you are so wonderful, why don't you give back the animal its life?" And the animal wakes up. "Glooskap, what happened?" He says, "Oh, never mind." He says, "You go back to the forest. We will have this relationship forever." The animal runs away, but in its place is another dead animal, and grandmother skins it, and she tells Glooskap, "From those sparks left over from your creation, bring 7 sparks and bring them together in the middle, So he picks up the sparks. He's very strong and very supernatural in the way he is in his existence, and he picks up another spark. Finally, he puts 7 sparks together. And grandmother tells him, bring 7 pieces of wood and build a wigwam around those sparks. So he picks up 7 pieces of dry wood. It's like firewood, round, and they're covered the pile of sparks. Then he says, call our cousin, the whirlwind, to come and visit. He says, Wajusen. Wajusen is the word for whirlwind. Come and visit. And all of a sudden, whirlwind comes in and off it goes. And after it passed, the fire was burning. It caused the sparks to heat up, and a fire is burning in that central fire. We call this the Chibukto, the great spirit fire. And on that fire, they cooked their first meal of meat to celebrate grandmother's arrival to the world. And grandmother created clothing from the animals, food from the meat, tools from the bones, medicine from the internal organs, and so on. So they were able to continue their existence. So that's how grandmother arrived into this world, in a relationship of teaching the young person everything there is to know about surviving in this world. One day, Glooskap, he left the area of the fire and he walked towards the east coast. And when he was walking along this tall grass, sweet-smelling grass, a young man stood up in front of him. And he looked at him and he says, who are you? Where did you come from? The young man says, I am your sister's son, Nadawansam. When whirlwind passed by, he caused the waters to make big waves. And now, after the big waves hit the shore, foam began to form. And the foam was blown ashore until it landed on the grass. And with the help of the giver of life, grandfather, son, and mother earth, gave me the body of a young man. I am strong. I can bring you everything. I can run and chase everything and bring firewood for grandmother. I will do everything physically strong that is needed to do for our survival. I have also the vision, the gift of my ancestors to keep an eye on you. Because as a young person, I have to follow the way of life that you show me. And when our elders are teaching us these stories, they say, you have to watch how you behave in front of your children. Because what you do, they will do. If you abuse drugs, if you abuse alcohol, they will do the same thing. But even more, to show you their love, they can tell you they can do it better than you. So you have to be careful what they see you are doing. And so it's this kind of thing, like this creation story, that kind of keep us in balance with ourselves as people and with the animals, their behavior. So since the young man come from the ocean, Glooskap called upon the fish of the ocean to come ashore and offer themselves. And again, he offered an eagle feather and he apologized for taking the life of his brothers and sisters, the fish. Grandfather, son, I'm sorry I'm taking their shadows. Mother Earth, I'm sorry I'm taking part of your creation as my subsistence. And so after that, they bring the fish to grandmother, and grandmother cook a feast of fish to celebrate the young person's arrival to the world. And then, next thing you know, when Glooskap was sitting by himself, grandmother and the young man, his nephew, were somewhere gathering food or whatever. A woman sat beside Glooskap, and she put her arm around him and said, "Are you cold, my son?" He looked at her and said, "Who are you? Well, you're not my grandmother. Who are you?" She says, "I am your mother. I come from a leaf of a tree early this morning, fell to the earth, and dew formed over this leaf. And with the help of the giver of life, grandfather, son, and mother earth gave me a body of a young woman. I come here to give strength to my children. I come here to teach my children to take care of one another, to love one another, to rely on each other so that they will survive forever. And this is the message that the mother brings to Glooskap, and Glooskap is happy that his mother come to help him. He called upon his nephew to go and gather food from the tree and the plants, the fruits and the vegetables, the roots and the berries and everything that they can gather from the plants. So they brought them together, and grandmother prepared a big vegetarian feast. So they were all together now, the big family, the giver of life, grandfather's son, Mother Earth, Glooskap, the leader, Nugami, the grandmother, his grandmother, the wisdom and knowledge keeper, the young person had all the strength to do everything that a nation needs to do. They are the backbone of our nation, the young people. And the mother who brought everybody into creation. She bring all of us, she feed us from her body, and she take care of us until we are able to run around and feed our own selves from Mother Earth. So we take the plants, the fish, the birds, and the fish, and the animals to be able to feed ourselves. So this is how the creation story kind of centers around our people who are living up the river systems, along the coastlines, on the land, and the oceans and the islands, that we are moving freely around. And anybody can walk through our territory, and we don't say, it's our land, get off our land. Europeans, when they came and arrived, we didn't say, where's your passport? What are you here for? How long are you visiting? Nothing like that, because we belong to the earth. We say, welcome, come, there's food everywhere. We will show you how to survive. So in the creation story, it goes on more deeper than this. It takes 7 days to tell the story from a ceremonial context. We stop, we dance, we eat, we celebrate, we play games, we go to sleep. Next day we get up, we do a sunrise ceremony. Somebody lights up a ceremonial pipe, and the sun is slowly coming up, and we give thanks to those 7 sacred directions. Our prayers are centered around the creation story. Our ceremonies are centered around the creation story. So our terms of negotiation with the land, with Mother Earth, is that we always ask for things before we take them. We always have to dream of an animal. If we want to go hunting, we dream of the animal. And when the animal approaches us, like a moose or a deer, if it comes at us this way and keeps going, it doesn't stop, we don't chase, we don't run after. If the animal comes this way and then all of a sudden stops and goes this way and shows us their vulnerable side, their weak side, well, it is offering itself to us. And we would shoot it or throw a spear at it and kill it. The French have a term, they call it la chasse, is you chase, you run after an animal. Indigenous philosophy is we wait for the animal or the fish or the birds. We wait for them to come to us. We pretend to be a moose. And a bull moose will come to us and turn its side, and then that's when So there are ethical, moral ways of connecting to that animal. We ask permission first. We dream. We ask in our dream. We ask in our ceremony by drumming and dancing and pretending to be a deer. I am honoring you as a deer. And maybe I would wear the skin of a deer that I shot last year. And maybe I wear the antlers and dance like a deer to honor and respect and ask that they continue to come back to us. So these are the ceremonies. And then we light the pipe. we build a sweat lodge, we call a sweat lodge, but it actually means the womb of our mother. And we crawl inside this sweat lodge. It's a dome shaped, if you ever see dome tents with an opening in one way. Well, the opening we build it out of small young trees that we bend over. We dig in a circle into a ground, and then we bend them over and weave them together, and we cover it with skins of animals. And we come inside and sit around. But on the outside, the opening is facing to the east where the sun rises. But maybe 15 feet away, 3-4 meters away, is a center where the fire is. And inside that fire, we put 17 stones, 28 stones, about this big. And we light the fire. And those stones heat up to be red hot. And we carry those stones with antlers of a deer fastened on a stick. And we pick the stone in the fire, and we bring it inside the dome. And we put 7 stones in there. 7 stones to represent the first level of creation. 7 of them. Giver of life, grandfather, son, Mother Earth, Glooskap, his grandmother, his nephew, and his mother. That represents those 7 stones inside of this. We cover the door and we pour water on the stones. You remember grandmother who was covered in the dew of the early morning. Well, this dew was represented with water, and we pour the water on the stones, and it is like a sauna, but sometimes it is a little bit hotter than a sauna. But it depends on who is in there and how many people and how old they are. The older people can withstand lots of heat. Younger people cannot. So we have to gauge, and people have to know how to pour the water and how big the sweat lodge is. So we do that 4 times, 7 rocks each time. The second round is to honor the 7 families that came out of that fire. There were 7, and one of those families is Mi'kmaq people, my culture. And we go to the East Coast, and we divide ourselves into 7 clans. The translators won't be able to say these words. There are 7 clans. There are Geskabegia Ewa, Siganik Tugewa, Ebegwitnewa, Gespogitkewa, Sukubanegadigewa, Unamagigewa, and Eskegia Ewa. The 7 clans in our family. So it's because of the 7 levels of creation. We don't want to forget the number 7, so we divide ourselves into 7 major fires. But they're geographic locations, but they're not divided by territory or lines saying, oh, you can't hunt in my territory. We know each other, we travel across each other's territories, and even foreign tribes from different areas can come as long as they don't disrupt and take away our food source, or our fish, or everything that we need to rely on. So it is good we're able to go through in these ways. So the ceremonies are, the sweat lodge ceremony is one, the pipe ceremony is another, the sweet grass ceremony. The sweet grass is where the young person came from. It's sweet smelling grass, we braid it and we light it up, and we offer the smoke from the sweet grass to giver of life, grandfather, son, inside myself. I represent my ancestors who are my shadows, and then down below to Mother Earth, to the east, the leaders, to the south, the grandmothers for their wisdom and knowledge, to the west, the young people, to the north, our mothers. So our prayers, our offerings of tobacco smoke, sweetgrass smoke, or sage smoke, or our words, they're always offered in those 7 sacred directions. So our terms of negotiation for survival are those ceremonies. We ask first, then we come back, and we honor the food. We say we have ceremonies before we eat. We have communal dances to share the food and the skins and the bones and everything that comes from that animal, so that everybody has whatever they need to survive. And this is what we call our mawiomi. Our Miga Maui Mawiomi is we share a common shelter, we share the food, the medicines, the clothing, the tools, and how we travel about. Everybody benefits from that. It is shared on a communal basis. So this is our way of surviving on the land. And then Europeans arrive, the Vikings arrive, an introduction of metal. And this caused a lot of disruption in the New World. The introduction of the metal. You can cut a tree down all of a sudden. And the introduction of the copper kettle. More nations on the interior want access to this copper kettle. And the Mi'kmaq people are in control. They're controlling, those people coming and meeting these people that are coming from the east. And so relationships began to change. We had a very spiritual relationship with the land. And then with the introduction of steel and metal and copper, our attitudes began to change towards our own mother. The Basque arrive, whaling and cod. There are friendly trade relations. Here's a metal axe, here's a metal knife, here's a copper kettle, and the Indians are happy. They go back and forth. Also, the lauburu, this symbol that the Basque people carried and brought, and they sculpted into the steles when their people die over there, and they put it in the ground. Indian people, they look at this iconographic symbol, which is very, yes, that's those people, yes. And then they invent a word for that. We call it Sawasakhnuk in our language. And Sawasakhnuk is the four winds. And we have a symbol of that. Too bad I didn't have a screen here. I would have showed some of those symbols, iconographic Basque symbols. We have them in our artwork. Symbolism that is many centuries, early 1500s, when the Basque whalers came and fishermen. So we were able to exchange those things. This shirt I have on, I call it Atlai, Ottere. It's a Basque word, but we changed it to Adlai. It's an item of trade, and we kept the word. Even today, when I put my shirt on, I would say, Nasalagan Dadlayan. I put on my shirt, Adlai. There are locations in our territory that are given Basque names. People, they landed in that shoreline, and we went there to trade cookies. Kakuna. Kakuna is a little sea biscuit that the Basque people brought and carried, and the Indians, they took these sea biscuits and ground them down and made cakes out of them, because they put in also ingredients to make those things to rise. The Gregorian chants that we have in our Catholic culture, they were thought to have been influences by the French at Port Royal in the 1610 when they arrived there. Champlain arrived there and made a settlement in Nova Scotia, a place called Port Royal. But they were really surprised. Jesuit priest, a guy named Pierre Biard, he came from France, and he saw the Indians speaking half Basque, the language. And another French lawyer, Marc Lescarbot, he thought the Mi'kmaq people were so strongly influenced by the Basque that half of their language was Basque, or he hear many, many Basque words among the Mi'kmaq people. So the trade language and connections to the early Basque is seen. We've only touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of the research that can be done in terms of the relationship between our people, the Mi'kmaq people, and the Basque that arrived to fish whale and cod, and to render these. They had to have friendly relationship with the indigenous people, otherwise they would be attacked and killed, and there is no stories about attacks and killing. Somehow there were attacks and killings with the Vikings, according to the Viking stories. So the Basque arrived, the Bretons from France arrived. They're also an oral culture, they're sailors, they're fishermen. The Bretons arrived, the Normans arrived as well, and then the French arrived. But the Bretons, the Basques, and the Normans were already there. They'd say, oh yeah, just I'll sell you my boat. So they send the French people. It was a quiet sovereignty. The Mi'kmaq liked the French. They make friends with them. They welcome them as they did with the Basque and so on. But the French had a quiet sovereignty. I call it quiet sovereignty. They were talking about it among themselves, but not to us. They bring in the laws of the king, le roi de France, Henri IV. He brings their laws for among themselves. And so they develop these communities all over our territory. But they fortify their communities and say, we make a treaty. You stay on the other side of the fence, okay? And we say, okay, no problem. Pas de problème. Je reste ici. So it was like a quasi-colonization. The French knew about their king, and there were commercial enterprises that came. They came with charters, they call them, for the fishermen, the navire, the boats. They come and they bring the laws of the king only to apply among themselves. And wherever they plant themselves, they apply it. But to the king in France, this was all his territory, because these forts were almost everywhere, maybe 10, 15 in the Maritimes, maybe not that many, 5 or 6. And they raised the French flag, but to us, they come here, they want to live here, they're friends to us, they want to marry our young daughters. Sure, you didn't bring any women. Why? You can marry our children. They keep you warm for the winter, our daughters. So there was a lot of exchange among the French people. And those children that were born between the French and the Indians, they're called the Acadian people, les Acadiens. And these are the groups that started to develop. They became a group of negotiation between the French and the Mi'kmaq people, les Acadiens. But then all of a sudden the British people arrive, and they arrive once in a while in the early 1600s. Well, back in 1613, this guy named Argall, he came from Virginia representing the British, and he came and he broke into Port Royal, and he destroyed it, burned it, and he chased. The French were not there at the time when Argall attacked, and when he left, the French arrived back and discovered everything was all destroyed, and so it was very difficult for them to reestablish themselves. And besides, between 1607 and 1610, the French lost their charter to stay in Port Royal. So they left it, and they left a Mi'kmaq chief. Member 2 was his name. I descend from that chief who looked after Port Royal for the French when they went back to France. But when they came back to renew they came back in 1610, and they arrived on the feast of Pentecost, 7 Sundays after Easter. So they celebrated a big mass, welcome back, and then on June 24, 1610, they baptized my ancestor, chief member to the French. They gave him the name of Henri IV, King of France, Le Roi de France, Le Roi de Navarre. And he's given, my chief, he's given his name in June 24, but the people that sailed across, they didn't have cell phones or telephone. They didn't know Henri IV had been stabbed to death, assassinated in Paris by Ravaillac was his name, I think, that killed Henri IV. But the French people didn't know, so they gave him the name. And Henri IV and his family, they were the godparents of Member Two and all of his children, his wife and 20 children, because Member Two was over 110 years old when he was baptized. And so when the French arrived back, the following, Jesse Fléché was the man that baptized, and he came from Langres in France, and he was a secular priest. He didn't belong to any missionary like the Jesuits. But the Jesuits arrived back in 1611 just to see, long enough to see Member Two die on September 19th, 1611. He was over 111 years old, and they buried him. The Indians and the French had a big argument over where this Member Two is going to be buried. They wanted to bury him in the traditional Indian burial ground, and the French wanted to bury him on consecrated ground that is blessed by the French. And so they had this big argument, and the night when he died, he had a last confession by the French priest, and he said, "Bury me in your ground so my people will become Catholics." And this is where the Mi'kmaq people today are predominantly, we have 30 Mi'kmaq communities, we have 30 Roman Catholic churches, based on that relationship that the Indians had, an agreement that they had with the French to enter into this agreement at Port Royal. And so the Indians became Catholics. But the British arrived and they chased the French away. 1656, 1676, 1692, 1702, and then 1713 was the last time that the French the British attacked the French. And the Treaty of Utrecht was entered into in 1713. The French give up their territory in North America to the British. But not very long after, the French were given back certain territories to keep, like Cape Breton, where I am living now, was French territory, and the rest of Nova Scotia was British territory or English territory. And the Prince Edward Island was French territory, and Newfoundland was French territory on the west coast in Placentia. It was still identified as French territory. But from 1720 to 1725, the British start to ask the Indians, "Can you stay out of our wars between us and the French? We don't want you involved. You guys are terrible. You scare our people. You scalp us. You cut off our heads. We don't want you involved in our wars. We will scare each other and cut off each other's heads. Thank you." So those treaties between the British and us were treaties of peace and friendship. Saying, okay, we stay out of your war. But we didn't give land to the French, to our understanding. We didn't give our sovereignty to the French. The British took that sovereignty from the French but they assumed the sovereignty over all the territory because it was understood on this side of the world that the French had Nouvelle France as their territory, and whether the Indians knew it or not was none of our business. So by 1755, the Acadian people they are expelled from l'Acadie, Nouvelle France, l'Acadie, all the Acadian people and French people. There were two groups of people in North America. Those that intermarried with the Indians, they called themselves les Acadiens, and the French people that had arrived in groups, in shiploads afterwards. They arrive in Quebec City, they arrive in Montreal, they arrive in Gaspésie, they arrive in Newfoundland, Cape Breton, and Nova Scotia. I mean, they were not bothered, but there were some Acadians that were expelled from Prince Edward Island. Anyway, within 20 years, they made their way back by walking back from Louisiana. Those people that are called Cajuns in United States, in Louisiana. Some of them made it back to their old territories because they were still related to some of the Mi'kmaq people, and so they lived very close by to Mi'kmaq settlements. And the British no longer had they had bigger concerns about their own people among themselves. They were beginning to develop ideas of war. Loyal to the king, Americans, revolution, Republicans. They started to fight among themselves. And the Indians again were told, stay out of our battles, please. So the Indians enter into the last peace and friendship treaty. When the United States decided to separate on July 4th, 1776, the Mi'kmaq people entered into a treaty with the first independent nation of the United States on July 19, which was only 2 weeks after they declared their independence. We still have a copy of that treaty among our people. It was on July 19, 1776. It was called the Treaty of Peace at Watertown in Boston, Massachusetts. Well, just outside of Boston. It was in the western part. Then the War of 1812, there was a Napoleonic War here in Europe, and then the War of 1812 in Canada. The British against the Americans this time. Canada was a British state. But it was kind of settled after just a few skirmishes, no big major loss of humans. Then they had American Civil War in 1860. Some of our Mi'kmaq people went all the way down to fight in the American Civil War. And then they had the Métis people uprising in central Canada and Manitoba, what is called Manitoba today. Louis Riel was a descendant of Mi'kmaq, not Mi'kmaq, but Indian and Irish French Catholics. And so they intermarried, and a nation grew out of this to be called the Métis of the Red River Valley of Manitoba. And there were rumblings since early 1820s, but they started to develop further and further after Confederation, after 1867, And soon after that, when the treaties were being signed in the prairies, in the central part of Canada, where the land is flat and just grass is growing there, there were lots of buffalo herds there that the Indians relied on. And the buffalo herd was being impacted quite drastically. They were being wiped out, literally. And Louis Riel wanted to establish a state for him, the Métis people, and the Indian peoples, the Cree and Ojibwe and the Assiniboines. And so battles took place there, and finally everything came to an end at the end of 1887. There were no more battles. Canada continued its drive westward, entered into numbered treaties this time, all the way to Treaty Number 10. And after that, 1876, an Indian Act was developed. They put Indians on pieces of land saying, you stay on this land, we will provide everything for you, your food, your medicine, your shelter, your education, your medicine chest, and so on, and you stay on the reserve. The federal government of Canada tell the Indians, you stay there, don't go out of the reserve. So the Indians were placed on reserves as early as the 1860s. But this system of establishing reserves was started as early as 1786 by the British Crown in eastern Canada, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. After the American Revolution in 1876, New Brunswick was formed and a new colonial government was created. A piece of Nova Scotia was separated. Now we have New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And Prince Edward Island was Ile Royale, and it was changed to Prince Edward Island after Confederation, or just before Confederation. So the Indian Act put the Indians on reserves, and they gave us numbers. They register every Indian person that is born. You are number 337, you belong on reserve number 15 in New Brunswick. And that's the way conditions were until Aboriginal rights like hunting, fishing, trapping, harvesting was the problem the Indians started to experience every time they wander outside of the reserve. They are charged by government officials. There were private lands off the reserve belonging to Canadians, British people before, whoever was British. They were Irish, Scottish. They were French people that also became Canadians. So they became owners of the land. They were given grants of land. But the government also saved some land for themselves. They call crown lands. So we have the federal government who had crown lands, federal crown lands, and each province had also their own crown lands in the provinces. So the Indians, every time they want to go and hunt or fish or trap, they would be charged as early as late 1888, and as late as last year, somebody was charged for fishing, and they have to go to court and they have to prove that they are the descendants of those Indians that signed the treaties with the British Crown, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to follow the court cases all the way up to the highest court level in Canada, called the Supreme Court of Canada. Although we win some cases, there was some argument between the federal and the provinces over who has right over the animals or the fish or the birds or the plants or whatever. And so even though we win, there's still battles going on, they still charge our people. And so it's not a settled area, and we always have to take matters to court in order to win our rights, our Aboriginal and treaty rights. Treaties that we entered with them to say, we stay in peace. We just continue living the way we live by getting our food and medicine and shelter in the way the creation story told us we will survive and live. So by 1956, well, there's another aspect, is the residential school systems were started in Canada. The federal government took responsibility over educating the Indians. So they took the responsibility, but they took the churches, Catholic Church, Anglican Church, Baptist Church. There were like about 5 or 6 churches that took the responsibility, and with the police of the land, they go to the community and say, well, we're going to take your children from you. We're going to educate them to become Canadian citizens. So they take children from the Indian families, and they are put into something like 150 residential schools across the country. Children are educated there. When they are 16 years old, they're free to go. They go back to their community. They don't recognize their parents. They don't recognize their grandparents. They can't speak the language anymore. And the grandparents say, I don't know what to do with my child or my grandson. I can't speak to him anymore. And so the children, 16 to maybe 20, 30 years old, finally, they go into the city. And the non-native people in the city, they want all the jobs, any job opportunity. And an Indian comes into the city. Well, what are you doing here? No, you go and dig the ditch, or you go pick the garbage. And sometimes the Indian will do that. But eventually their social well-being is very bad, and they start drinking, doing drugs. And so a lot of the residential school survivors end up killing themselves, dying from diseases, and freezing to death in the winter on the streets in the cities. So this was from the early 1900s right up to 1980s, the residential school system. But 3-4 years ago, the government of Canada turned around and he apologized to the Indians, saying, "We are sorry that your people suffered from a system that we developed. Here's $100 million, here's $600 million. We hope that will fix your problem." A lot of our people, that residential school survivors, ended up taking the money, $20,000. Oh, okay, So they buy more alcohol, more drugs. It didn't help any. The communities are still in bad shape as a result of the social imbalance that was presented for about 3 or 4 generations of our people in the residential school system. So much about the residential school. 1956, we had what we call the Dry Bones case. Joseph Dry Bones was a Dene Indian in Yellowknife in Northwest Territories, the northern part of Canada. He was drunk, and he was walking into the lobby of a hotel, and the hotel manager called the police. Police came and grabbed him, but put him in jail, and he was charged under the Indian Act. But this young non-Indian lawyer come out of law school, and he wants to try a case, The Bill of Rights was introduced in 1956, and he said, it said all Canadians have a right to their possession. They can own a house, they can have the right to have property, they have the right for protection under the police laws and all of this. So he brought the case he didn't charge the Indian, he did it for free. And he brought the case every level all the way to the Supreme Court by 1960. So he won in 4 years of court cases, he won all the way to the top, and the Supreme Court of Canada said, well, according to the Bill of Rights of 1956, this Dry Bones is entitled to have alcohol in his possession. He's a Canadian, he's entitled to he's living in Canada, he's the original Canadian, in fact, and he can drink all he wants. So the government changed its position by 1960. It gives citizenship to Indians in Canada. For the first time, Indians become Canadians in Canada. We were aliens before that. We were termed aliens. We were wards of the crown. We were like the children of the crown. We could not take care of ourselves before 1960. So things began to change. By 1969, the federal government developed an idea that the Indian was still a problem in Canada. It was a social disaster for Canada. The Indians they were living in poverty. The reserves were like villages of poverty. The housing was bad. The roofs were leaking. The stoves and stovepipes. There was no plumbing inside the houses. It was just bad. There was lots of diseases and lots of deaths, suicides in Native communities. So the white paper policy was a federal government policy paper that says, okay, no more Indians, no more Indian Act, no more Indian reserves. So they pushed this through the House of Parliament, the House of Commons, the federal government of Canada. The Indians, they organize. In each province, they organize. I was a very young man at the time, 18, 19, and I was being asked to help the elders because they didn't speak English. I spoke English. And I interpreted all of the things for them as best as I could in my Mi'kmaq at the time, and it helped me also build stronger my Mi'kmaq language. So I explained all of this, and we organized across Canada. Then a national Indian Brotherhood organizations build up. And because the Canadian people in general were concerned about what the governments can do to them. If they can do that to Indians, they could easily do that to us. So there was collaboration. The CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which was the national television in Canada, they started to listen to us. They hear interviews from us. We say, well, it's impossible to just do away Indians like that. We're still living on reserves. What's going to happen to those communities? Who's going to support those communities? The provinces? And the provinces were saying, no, they're not our responsibility. And we're not collecting taxes from the Indians. Nobody was collecting taxes from the Indians because the Indians lost their lands, and the governments, the British Crown, took over the lands and said that the Indian lands were held in trust by the British Crown, but that the settlement of those other lands will come someday, eventually. So the white paper died in Parliament because of non-native people helped us as Indians in Canada, because our treaty rights and Aboriginal rights were being stepped on, or were going to be wiped away with the stroke of a pen by signing this legislation and saying, no more Indians in Canada, we don't have no more Indian problem. So it backfired on the government, and so they turned around and started to help us form our own small governments. Each reserve was a local government, and then from there, self-government, and then First Nations governance structures were talked about by 1982. The Canadian Constitution was repatriated from Britain because our Constitution was called the British North America Act of 1867, and it was held in the British Parliament in England, London, England. So it was repatriated back to Canada, and now amendments to that Constitution started to be taking place in Indians negotiating with the Prime Minister and the premiers of each provinces. And those conferences were called First Minister Conferences. And they started to open the door to the Indians to bring our issues to the front. And so we're at a point where the door is open and we're still negotiating, but matters are being brought into the court system. But as we win our rights, federal legislation starts to shift a little bit to recognize and saying, okay, you don't have to pay taxes in the provinces anymore. You don't have to pay certain federal service taxes if services are brought to your community, and the commercial enterprise brings something, and if you buy a car and somebody delivers the car to your Indian reserve, then you don't have to pay taxes. But if I work off the reserve, I have to pay taxes to the government. If I work in the reserve, I don't pay taxes to anybody. And if we purchase objects that are brought to the reserve, we don't pay taxes on them. But if anybody goes outside of the communities, we pay taxes. At some point in time, maybe 10 years ago, some provinces, they waived taxes for Indians. And you get a provincial ID, identification card. You don't pay taxes on gas. You don't pay taxes on alcohol. You don't pay taxes on cigarettes. And you don't pay taxes on the government service tax, GST. So, but some of the provinces, after having issues of territoriality over treaty rights and commercial harvesting rights, like lumber, with native people. They said, okay, no more free service for Indians, no free tax for Indians. Now they will have to pay taxes. So in Canada, there's only one province, Ontario, that still recognize their relationship of not paying the taxes. But they're all also slowly extending their territory north for cutting trees mostly and for mineral resources. So they call that the golden horseshoe. It's kind of a ring that's slowly going further and further north and into a lot of indigenous communities and their territories. And the indigenous people are resisting, complaining, protesting in the parliament, and sometimes you have these flare-ups. We had the latest one was called the Idle No More movement. The Indians banded together, but eventually the common Indian and the leaders were separated, and the leaders' funding was being pulled a little bit, and so they have to be careful who they support all of a sudden. And so the movement kind of quietly disappeared. So there's no Idle No More in Canada. I mean, every once in a while a small university group will get up and, march around a city or town or in front of Parliament and bang drums and carry flags, but that's about the extent of them. Generally, they're being ignored by the politicians as I speak. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions or answers, thank you very much. No questions? No answers? Or maybe that's what I'm going to need. Oh, here it is.
But, okay. My question really is, I have been in the reservation territories in Arizona and New Mexico. And I was very, very surprised when I was there to see how the Indians with the gambling casinos live and how deteriorated the life in these territories was. So my question is, do you have the same problems there with the gambling casinos, or you don't?
They have similar problems in Canada, in some of the native communities, because they made agreements with provinces to set up casinos. But the original intent was to set up the casinos for non-Indigenous peoples to come to their community and stay in a hotel, have a secure and safe parking, so that there was no fear, some wild Indian's going to smash my window in my car or rob me while I'm trying to, because there was some mentality in that context. Myself, I do not gamble. I don't support gambling, because for Indigenous peoples, entering into the sphere of gambling is like you're taking your wallet and throwing it away with your money and credit cards, whatever. And that money should be going to the children to want to go to school, their clothes, their food, their shelter, to make a good social life. Already the communities, native communities, have bad social conditions. And you put a gambling casino in the reserve, it's only the people that from the reserve that are using those places. And it's the welfare system that is supporting the gambling. People on welfare, every 2 weeks or once a month, they receive their check, they buy a little bit, they borrow the rest, and that's their system, that's their life. And It's not a good thing for Native people in a general context. I mean, there are some rich Native people that go gambling all the time and they just pour their money into machines that will eat it and once in a while spit back a little bit to make that person have that hope that maybe I'm going to get 1 million next time. I don't believe in it. I don't like it. And I've seen the ones in the United States, and some of them have been progressive in terms that they set up laws that they don't allow local indigenous people to go into those to casinos. Yes. Thank you.
What do you know about the connection between the Basque people and your country? Does it come from history or archaeology, or does it remain something in the collective memory by oral tradition?
I believe it's in the collective memory of our oral traditions, but our people have been educated away from our own traditions and our cultures. And it's somebody like myself who is discovering these stories of the Basque. Because I also have education from university, and I see and am able to support oral history with academic information, research that connects some stories. And it's a difficult task to wade through all these oral traditions, because there are stories that embed certain facts. Like there's a story about Keduasaluit and Wijiboget. They're like two separate chapters of a story where a mother from our culture is taken by another tribe next door to us, and the child is born in another community and raised as a member of another tribal group. But then they make fun of him, and he makes slowly his way back to his own territory, and he kills his father, who is a Mohawk, and he makes his way back home. The Mohawk go after him, but they do a lot of harm to him and his community. But after he becomes well, he goes into this territory and goes to each of those 7 clans, and the names of those 7 clans are embedded in this story. Also, all of the ancestors that are of the chiefs from my lineage are embedded in that story as well. And so the story itself, it sounds, if you hear it for the first time, you cannot read anything other than some entertainment about this Indian killing his father and making his way back, and then him being killed, and all of a sudden he goes and he asked these men, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, can you give me some members of your family to re-family myself? And I didn't realize this story contained my ancestry and the history of the 7 districts and who was the head of each of those 7 districts in my Mi'kmaq territory. And our relationship with the Mohawk goes back many, many years, even before Europeans arrived here. So you have to read all these stories very closely to see those exchanges of information between tribal groups and between European people that arrived, the French, the Basques, the Bretons, the Normans, and so on. And there are stories that talk about Indians coming even to France, to Europe, to be in the courts of the kings, to kill a bull and to skin the bull. And then when I read the story in a historical book, Montaigne, I think his name was Montaigne or Lamontagne, a French philosopher, was describing an Indian in the French court killing a bull and demonstrating to the people in the audience, how to skin it and cook a fire and all of that stuff. It's like if I was brought here to kill a moose or a cow and show you how it's done. It's interesting to see those kind of things develop and come out in oral history. But it's a combination of oral history evidence and historical evidence. It's a combination. It's helping us have a window to the past, a much better view.
Bueno, si no hay más preguntas.
Bye. Valley.
Yes, if I understood today, your people live in a reserve.
Yes.
How much people live in a reserve? I don't know how much Mi'kmaq are there.
The reserves vary from 50 acres to 3,000 acres. But when the British government gave land to us, they gave us 51,200 acres. But 20 years later, after the British loyalists arrived, a lot of that land was taken back, and we only had 2,200 acres left.
But people, how much people live in a...
Well, back then we had maybe 150 people. Today, in my reserve, there's 3,000 people live there. Some reserves have 5,000, some have 8,000.
And people work in the reservation, or they go to the town to work?
There's hardly any work in the reserves. There's only a few jobs. The unemployment rate is up over 60-70% in all the reserves. We have to leave the reserve to find work unless I was a chief or administrator in a reserve administering social service and infrastructure, policing, housing, education, those things. There are only jobs for those things there in the reserve. There's no industry, there's no manufacturing, no car sales or furniture or clothing in most reserves. But some reserves are slowly developing into big commercial enterprises like shopping centers and big grocery stores. But only some, not all.
¿Hay alguna página o algún guía turístico para poder visitar vuestro pueblo en Canadá? Sobre todo la cultura espiritual y así.
Sí. Sí.
Repito. Pregunto si hay alguna página web o algún guía turístico,
Yes.
alguna forma de visitar vuestro pueblo o vuestra cultura espiritual.
Yes, there are lots of websites. A lot of communities have their own websites, and it gives you their name of the chief and band council and the structure of the community. A lot of them have those things, but there are isolated and communities that don't have much opportunity for developing much of anything else. But most communities along the southern part, close to the American border, the Maritimes, and along the St. Lawrence River Valley, all the way across Canada, they would have websites and all of those kind of information if you wanted to visit. I mean, if you landed in Halifax and drove to Ottawa, you would be able to visit many Native communities in that area. And a lot of them are very well advanced, and they're close to urban areas. But those ones that are not close to those urban areas are suffering quite drastically.
Nos dicen que tenemos que acabar ahora mismo a las 9. Eskera unitz arguinu.
Alwimu.
Wimu. Is the name of Stephen in Elnu.
Yes.
Thank you.